Apple launched 3D Touch with the iPhone 6s, and today we're talking about how it might not actually be sticking around in future iPhones and why I'm actually not okay with that. Apple, you remove a lot of things, but it's usually because it's in favor of a newer technology or a more convenient technology. Apple, if you start removing 3D Touch on all of the iPhones coming out, this will not be in favor of a better technology. This will simply be to cut costs. This will be to lower the price of iPhones, which honestly doesn't feel like you're doing that anyway. So here is my case for keeping 3D Touch. So I've been a big fan of 3D Touch ever since it came out on the iPhone 6s. I never owned one myself, so I didn't get to experience it until I bought an iPhone 7. But when I did, I was instantly hooked. I felt like it made the user interface so much more immersive than before, whereas phones without 3D Touch felt like they were more solid and I couldn't interact with the display. I felt like the phone couldn't understand every way of communicating that I was used to. Especially when switching to the XR, I realized how much I use 3D Touch. Now, I completely understand why there's a lot of people okay with removing it, especially if you're used to using Android phones. You're not used to having 3D Touch at all, so you probably don't care about this subject in any way, shape, or form. That's fine. There's also a lot of people out there that are still using iPhones that don't have 3D Touch, whether it be iPhone 6 or earlier, or people who have just upgraded to the XR. They're saying, oh yeah, 3D Touch, that's a thing. I never use that. Who cares? Well, I definitely understand there's a huge market of people who don't use it. I think that there's also a huge market of people who use it every single day. Now, I know that my Twitter is very biased because it's a lot of Apple sheep and it's a lot of people who like Apple products, but look at this Twitter poll, okay? We got a vast majority of people saying yes, they use 3D Touch every day, and yes, they want it to continue be on iPhones. Now, I understand it's very distorted because we're a very techie genre, and there's a lot of people who don't use 3D Touch who probably also wouldn't follow me on Twitter, but this was by no means a close call, and it was by no means mixed. The results of this are at least saying that there's a fairly large audience of people who are interested in technology and also think 3D Touch is very useful and they want to keep it around. Now, I'm not suggesting Apple add 3D Touch to everything. You know, for a long time, we've been saying, why don't they add it to the iPad, or why don't they add it to more things? And honestly, I'm sure it has something to do with the size of the iPad, the display being too big, and when you make screens that large, it's difficult to implement the 3D technology so that it can sense the different pressure sense points. But I'm fine with all that, though I also understand for the iPhone XR to be possible, in order for it to be at the price it is, they had to remove 3D Touch because that made the display technologies cheaper, and they were experimenting with new forms of LCD so that they could have one size bezel all the way around. There was a lot of experimenting and there was a lot of unique design approaches when it came to the iPhone Liquid Retina display, so I get why there's no 3D Touch, but all I'm suggesting is that Apple, you keep around an option for people who want it. Perhaps the OLED iPhones that come out in 2019 can keep it around, and then the updated XR, guessing by the fact that the XR seems to be a pretty good selling phone, the people who buy the iPhone XR probably don't care about 3D Touch very much, but that does not mean that it's okay to remove it on everything else. And the only reason I'm bringing this up is there are many reports and many leaks to go around to suggest that Apple is considering removing the technology entirely from all of its products, with probably the one exception being the Apple Watch. There's a ton of features on here that absolutely need a Force Touch display, but to be fair, iPhones have 3D Touch, which allow for the force press and then the hard press. That's why they call it 3D, because there's 3 different ways to tap the display. The Apple Watch doesn't have 3D Touch, it has Force Touch, which just means you can push harder one time. There's no 3 different ways of pressing. So I don't think the force pressing technology would be abandoned on here because it is used in too many applications, but the fact of the matter remains that the iPhone XR has a lot of replacements for 3D Touch that just involve holding the display. If you want to activate a live photo, just hold on it instead of hard pressing. If you want to open up a menu in Control Center, just hold on it instead of hard pressing. And in some apps where you want to peek at an email or a text or a photo, which I do quite often in Instagram or in email, I just want to look at something really quickly. That's when I use 3D Touch the most. I just want to peek on it. But if I want to open it up all the way, that's where that third dimensional touch helps the most, because you're pushing a little bit harder to open it up all the way. I feel like it saves a ton of time, and especially when comparing 3D Touch to haptic touch on the iPhone XR, 3D Touch is just miles faster. As someone who uses my iPhone a lot, managing between different things, checking Wi-Fi, checking Now Playing tabs, especially when you're typing on the iOS keyboard and you want to move your cursor around, having 3D Touch is the quickest and most efficient way to move around your cursor. See, the XR, it can do that trick, but you have to hold on the spacebar in order to activate it. That goes for any other iOS device running iOS 12. And I noticed that when I did it on the iPhone XR, it didn't always work. Sometimes I would hold the spacebar and the cursor wouldn't activate right away. And regardless, you're telling people that before, just press hard on anywhere on the keyboard, and now you're saying, well, just press on this one space. Removing 3D Touch is absolutely a great compromise to keep prices low. If you're trying to look the most futuristic and look the most optimized, the iPhone XR compromises in a lot of areas that many people won't notice. But for the people that notice that the iPhone XR isn't enough for them because they use 3D Touch or they like OLED or they like the thinner bezels, I think absolutely Apple needs to keep this technology around. In fact, if you can, because we have so many people out there that enjoy this technology, why don't you try to see if you can adapt it to an LCD display on the XR? I know a lot of people don't care about it, but a lot of people do, and I think that these markets are fairly split. You have a lot of people out there who don't even know about it, and you have a ton of people out there that use it on a daily basis, and if you start removing it, it's going to upset them, and I imagine that with the iPhones coming out in 2019 and 2020, it's probably not even going to save that much money per unit. I find it particularly bizarre that we have a $750 phone in 2018 that can't have 3D Touch, yet the iPhone 6s, which still has a headphone jack from all those years ago, that is able to implement 3D Touch. That device that Apple used to sell, they don't even sell it anymore because it's that old, but when they did sell it, it was below $500. They could implement 3D Touch on that budget of a device, but in 2019 and in 2020, there's reports saying that maybe none of the new iPhones will have 3D Touch, and while it's great that the iPhone XR is selling really well, and it's very possible that the XR could be the best-selling iPhone of 2019, best-selling smartphone, I don't think Apple should look at that and say, okay, well, most people don't care about 3D Touch, so let's just remove it on everything. I think the best thing Apple could do for their iPhone lineup is have an option out there for everyone, and I think they did the best they could with this year's lineup. XR for people who are more on a budget, but the XS and the XS Max for people who are hoping for that premium, luxurious iPhone that has everything you could ever want, and that goes a little bit further with the stainless steel body, the thin bezels, the OLED with the true blacks. For people out there that want the very best iPhone possible, please keep implementing 3D Touch. But I totally get it. There's some people out there who don't care about it. Let them have the more budget option so they don't have as many bells and whistles that they'll never use. So that's why I think Apple needs to keep 3D Touch around for some people, and to those who don't care, they can have their option too. That way we can all win and we don't have to lose on a feature that I think is really, really helpful, is very, very efficient, and honestly, if Apple decides to axe 3D Touch next year and the following year, I'm going to be very surprised, because usually when Apple removes a feature, it's to save on money on a more affordable product, whereas if they're OLED and they're premium models, they start compromising on those to keep the prices down. It's like, you're already expensive. Just go all the way. Spend the extra $2 to $3 it costs per unit to get 3D Touch in there. Just even charge a little bit extra money. Maybe it will only be available on the plus size model. So like the smaller iPhone, even if it's premium, doesn't have 3D Touch. That would suck, and I don't want them to do that, but I would at least take it on one phone out of the lineup than nothing at all. So guys, let me know what you think of 3D Touch. Do you want it to go away completely, or are you in favor of having options, right? That's what this is really about. Not to mention, Samsung has a pressure-sensitive display in all of their Galaxy phones that allows you to press hard on the very bottom part of it so that you can go home in any app you're using, which once again showcases the idea that force pressure-sensitive displays can be very, very helpful and very, very intuitive, not just on iPhones, but on other smartphones out there. They don't have to be all 3D Touch, but I think Samsung has the best method of navigating the phone when having as little bezel as possible. So even in Samsung's instance, having a pressure-sensitive display was very helpful. But all of your guys' good stuff and opinions, let me know in the comments below. This is your Apple Sheep here. I'll see you in the next one.